Gata on opening the sutra. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So at this point in the retreat, the riggers are with us. But I want to just really, before I get going here, encourage you to lean into that. Most of our time, much of it anyway, is often spent in the pursuit of ease and in the pursuit of the low-hanging fruit. And I'm a fan of both of those things, to be sure. But I can enjoy those because there are times when, like, no, not now. Now, I choose to lean in. And it's that choice, it's that capacity that we have to bring ourselves to bear that is actually the linchpin on which all of this rotates. I think by now, most all of us have been dissuaded from our foolish view that the experience of sewing the robe will be a lofty, blissful, elevated, glitter-filled, although perhaps in moments. But it's not as bad as you feared either, is it? Funny thing about that. The mind anticipates and setups barriers and expectations, clings to things that happened in the past and holds them up as badges of honor or scars and wounds. And all of this can keep us from actually connecting to what's happening right now. And retreat is the place where we are able to actually encounter that and work with it, whether we're sewing or sitting in the zendo or working in the kitchen or whatever it is that our job happens to be, including if someday you have the calamitous misfortune of being a teacher here and you find yourself having all those responsibilities. It's really no different. We all practice whatever our practice is. I asked Reverend Kaishin yesterday to give a talk on the sewing, and I've asked Sensei to give a talk tomorrow specifically about Dharma names from a Dharma perspective. What's the deal? And that leaves me to try to address something about the Kesa and the practice and how it comes to us and the meaning of refuge. Just a small topic. There's a famous, to me, very important anecdote in history when Zen Master Dogen had exhausted what options he could find in his native land. From a very young age, he suffered the loss of his mother. This had a profound effect on him. The grief and the pain of that ended up being a very important fuel for the young Dogen. And in time, he encountered all of the expressions of the Dharma that had made it at that point to his native land of Japan. And he got pretty far involved. He was deeply in league, as we say, with these practices. And yet he found them to be insufficient and lacking. In here we have a choice. We can go, oh well. And most people will. Most people will encounter the spiritual and religious traditions of their upbringing, their native environment, come upon the limitations therein, and go, who cares? Good enough. Or perhaps just quietly fade away from them and kind of move on. There's pizza to be had, movies to be watched. But you, you fool. Well, couldn't be satisfied with that, could you? In fact, that's a hallmark of our great tradition, even when it's native to your space. Even in cultures where Buddhism is all over the place, like it was in Dogen's time, still there's something more than just, well, there's something more. And so like you, Master Dogen decided he needed to explore this. And that's a choice that each of us needs to make on our own terms, honoring our own life's trajectory and honoring the families that we come from and the traditions that have been foisted upon or inherited, including Buddhism. That happens to be the case. But somewhere along the line, we have to make our own individual choice to actually pursue the Buddha Dharma. And that means that you're going to encounter barriers, because this is the real thing. This is the real deal, okay? And that means that the whole thing is on the table. True enlightenment, true awakening, actually living in accord with this ancient and imminently present, fresh and new wisdom that is the truth of yourself. It's the truth of myself, it's the truth of the cosmos. And yet, if we don't take that leap, we won't access it. Even if we stumble into it a time or two haphazardly, still, this is not sufficient. And so we go on a journey. Now, we don't try to make the journey problematic. I don't sit with the seniors and plot how could we make this more troublesome for the initiates. You know, what evilry could we do? How could we throw sand in the air or put some trapdoors around? You know, yeah, it's not needed. You know, here's a floor, and here's a comfortable enough place to sit. But what's there is your mind, your heart, your body. So after all the pilgrimage and all the travel and all the effort and all the anticipation and the, oh my God, am I really doing this? You end up sitting there with yourself. Just like always. What the hell have I done this for? For good reason, my dear one, for very good reason. Now, in Dogen's case, and I bring him up because our precepts line comes directly from Master Dogen, okay? He's in your family. he, as I mentioned, found that the practices that were ready, available in Japan at the time, 12th century, rough cut, this awakening thing. What is that? And he really couldn't find satisfactory guidance. And so unlike most folks who just sort of get on with things, after all, there's marrying and grieving and birthing and job finding and wars and plagues, you know, the stuff of daily life. Not so different today. But for young Master Dogen, no. He understood it to be the case that China had the authentic transmission of the teaching of the Buddha. And he fixed his mind to go. After he talked with his current teacher, brought this to his teacher and said, I feel the training that I've received, with all respect, is not sufficient. And his teacher said, you know what? It's not. You're right. But I know that there are real awakened human Buddhas in China. Road trip? And he said, yeah. They made plans, and together, student and teacher traveled. Now, at that time, this is literally taking your life in your hands, okay? This is not a simple commute from Cleveland or something. This is like, you know, you have a very good chance of never making it to your destination, let alone get there and make it home safely. And yet, because this ache in the heart to really know the Dharma through and through was there, student and teacher left and made pilgrimage to China. Unfortunately, when they arrived, it did turn out to be the case that Master Dogen's teacher passed away there. And so here he was, stranded, alone, but his teacher set him on the right path. And it was now up to him. It's like a classic Luke Skywalker or Harry Potter or something. And so he traveled in China. And there he was seen as a loathsome foreigner from that backwater. Japan at the time was seen as a really way out there, boondocks kind of irrelevant place. China, the middle kingdom, the place where heaven and earth meet. This was the place to be. Of course, for the Chinese, they thought India was the shit. So this is a meme that happens. It's always somewhere else, right? Anyway, Master Dogen traveled around, and he heard of a real teacher. Interestingly enough, he encountered an old, venerable, wizened monk. And the robes and stuff are the same as you see here. Were very much the same. So he could tell what he was looking at. And he saw this old monk who had this backpack, this case thing on, filled with mushrooms and vegetables. And he bowed to the venerable old monk and said, "Dear monk, you are a disciple of the Buddha." And he said, "Oh, you're an ugly foreigner." What do you want? This is an important question. A little bit of a slight, and what do you want? This is a maneuver that happens. You see, the teachings in the Buddha, it's not up for sale with blazing lights trying to entice you. If anything, it's the opposite. Dogen had eyes to see that there was something about this elder monk and the chutzpah to approach. And so, of course, he gets rebuked. That's because he's getting taken seriously. But then the question comes, what do you seek? Strange foreigner. Why are you here? Fortunately, Dogen presented his mind and said something along the lines of, I seek the Buddha way. I seek to realize the truth of the Buddha Dharma, no less. But tell me, elder monk, why are you, with your many years here at the market, dealing with mushrooms and cabbages and stuff? And the monk said, well, this is my assigned place. I'm the Tenzo. And it's my job to come to the market and come to the village and pick the right stuff for the soup. And Dogen further showed his mind by saying, but that's ridiculous, you're so old. Why don't you have some young understudy do this, and you could spend your time, reciting the sutras or something? Wouldn't that be better? You could study the Dharma. After all, you're obviously going to die soon. At which the elder Tenzo looked up and down and said, clearly, you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, do you? But you have a good spirit about you. See, what he didn't know is that at that time in that place, the Tenzo was an abbot emeritus. It was actually the highest rank in the monastery. Higher than the person actively doing the doksan and stuff. That's, giving the talk, so you do that stuff. The highest gig is actually making the food that nourishes the entire Sangha. So he was talking to this massively heavy, accomplished, but how would he know? Uneducated foreigner, right? Anyway, he said, look, kid, if you want to really see the real thing, there is a teacher who might deal with the likes of you. He gave him the name, gave him a pointer, and disappeared into the market. Well, with this information in hand, young Dogen took it upon himself to find this teacher. And I'm making the story a little shorter. He did pilgrimage around, and he found many teachers in China that seemed lacking to him, because after all, institutions can creep up everywhere, and they do. And there was plenty of shops that were all about the donations and all about the business. But he remembered that name, and he found it. And he was, after some trials, allowed to stay. And here he encountered the practice in its real terms. He recounts the story this way. It's important. Please listen. This is from Keisa Kodoku from the Shobogenzo. During my stay in Sung, China, Dogen says, when I was making efforts on the long platform, the Zendos in these days, and some places still, this is an American-style Zendo, where we have like a ridiculously big space, and we do everything in it. We eat here, we have talks here, we sit in meditation here. This is the space. It wasn't like that. Back in these days, and in some traditional places, the place where you do the Zazen is got like these long platforms along the side, right? And there's a tatami, and you're up there. And it's very few. I mean, it's smaller than just the side of the Zendo by quite a bit. So when I was making efforts on the long platform, when I was doing sesshin, I saw that my neighbor, at the end of the morning sitting, would lift up his kaishapa, his raksu, and place it on his head. Then, holding hands together in veneration, he would recite a verse. The verse went like this: vast is the robe of liberation, formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, saving all sentient beings. This verse was recited 3 times, and on the 3rd time, he bowed such that the raksu, the okesa, fell into his hands, and he put it on as he finished the 3rd recitation of the verse. Dogen says about this, at that time there arose in me a feeling I have never before experienced. My body was overwhelmed with joy. Tears of gratitude secretly fell and soaked my lapels. You know, they're not much for expressing emotion. The tears are secret, but they're there. The tears of gratitude secretly fell and soaked my lapels, collars. The reason was that when I had read the Agama Sutra previously, I had noticed sentences about humbly receiving the robe on the head, but I could not clarify the standards of this behavior. But seeing it done now before my very eyes, I was overjoyed. I thought to myself, it is a pity that when I was in my homeland, there was no master to teach this and no good friend to recommend it. How could I not regret? How could I not deplore passing so much time in pain? Now that I am seeing and hearing it, I can rejoice in past good conduct. If I had vainly stayed in my home country, how could I have sat next to this treasure of a practitioner who has received the transmission of and who wears the Buddha's very robe? The sadness and joy was not one-sided. 1,000 myriad tears of gratitude ran down endlessly. And in some way, although we may well have our own tears of gratitude, it doesn't have to look that way. But there's this moment of recognizing the preciousness and the rarity of being able to actually encounter the true practice. I mean, consider if you had just decided to kind of not. I'm sure the thought occurred, and maybe it still is. But somewhere along the line, we have these connections where we see for ourselves the importance of what's actually happening. We actually encounter. And this mix of feeling the sting of not having connected, and frankly, the sting of how many people don't, and feeling the gratitude at having been able to contact it. It's this precious mix of humble, honest, earnest motivation. That I had stayed in my homeland vainly when there was no master there to transmit this. I'd heard about it. I read about it in the cool books. I'd heard about this. It spoke to me, but it wasn't clear what to do or how to do it. And after all, it's just a book staring at me. The book is a perfect book, but I'm a person. There's a gap there. How do I get this off this page? How do I contact the real thing? And so again, it comes down to you, doesn't it? You know, your raksu, your robe, the Buddha's robe, it's not really yours, by the way. Started as just a bolt of cloth, right? Mm-hmm. And from that same cloth were cut all the pieces. And gradually, joyfully, frustratingly, they're beginning to look a lot like Raksu. I like singing that once a year. Isn't it amazing? I remember actually when I first encountered the practice, I had no inclination of the garb and the customs and stuff. How would you really? I'd seen some pictures here and there. But then I saw that Raksu and that robe, and I saw the dignity and the capacity and the clarity and the connectedness. You could feel it. I could feel it. And then not in an egoic way, I knew I need this. I want this. This is myself. It took a little while for me to pick out some conditioning, for sure. But my connection to the robe was stronger than the conditioning. Thank goodness. However well intended, however benignly presented, your real truth cannot be given to you from outside. It cannot be. When you receive the precepts, you do not receive anything from outside of yourself. It's not how it works. When you take refuge in the Buddha, you're not taking refuge in me. You're not taking refuge in this hunk of metal behind me or any of the people in the lineage that it represents. Not really. Really what you're doing is taking refuge in your truth, your true nature. It doesn't get realer than that. Unpacking that, realizing that, training yourself to live out of that and trusting it, well, that's a process. That's a process. That's not a one and done. But this very visible expression of that reality that is the Raksu, that is the Buddha's robe, is indeed a miraculous item. I mean, if there are miracles, that's one. If there actually is magic in the world, it's in that robe. Because it's in you. Master Dogen, in that same fascicle later, says this: in sum, remember that the robe is the object of Buddha's veneration and devotion. It is the body of the Buddha and the mind of the Buddha. It is the body of the Buddha and it is the mind of Buddha. It is the body of awakened one. It is the mind of the awakened one. It is the object of veneration and devotion. Don't let those words scare you, even if you've been hit upside the head with them. Veneration and devotion has its place, the healthy version of it. We call it the clothing of liberation, the robe of a field of happiness, the robe without form, the supreme robe, the robe of great endurance, the robe of the Tathagata, of thusness, the robe of great benevolence, the robe of great compassion, the robe which is the banner of true excellence, and the robe of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. We should receive and retain it like this, humbly receiving it upon the head. Because it is like this, we should never change it according to our own mind. Inevitably, as the tradition moves through the centuries and through cultures, things have to flex, things have to adopt, things have to be forged anew to be perceivable and to be relevant, but only the extraneous little things. The way of speaking about things, the analogies that the teacher may use, the cultural references, these kinds of things, making a liturgy that actually works for the folks who are participating. After all, that's who it's for, right? But the core truth of the tradition doesn't move at all. Not a bit. Because the truth of that Buddha's robe is the truth of you. It's a miraculous encounter. As we move through the rest of this time that we have together, the rakshu will start to need to be fitted. I don't know, has that begun? We've had some fittings. Isn't that kind of a mind blower? Has anybody here had their rakshu fitted yet? Put a hand up if I can. Yeah, kind of weird, right? Do they get to see? Do you put a mirror around for them? Oh, you're spared. All right. Yeah, back in the farm, But you can see your peers, though. And these people that you thought, oh, well, just that person, suddenly, they've got rocks. Because, when you see a practitioner of some depth, it makes an imprint. It ought to, and it ought to be a good one. And then there will come a moment where you'll see yourself in that same robe, and I hope you don't take that for granted. I certainly don't. I mean, from one perspective, what is it? It's some cloth and some stitching and a bit of blood. But from another, it's you stepping into your true life. It's you giving yourself the gift of mastery of yourself. It's you finally finding home, the home that can't be taken away from you. Even if that robe becomes illegal and is burned with all the books, still the real robe cannot be taken from you. That's the miracle. That's the amazing thing. So as you gradually transform from initiates to initiates who've sowed araksu, I bid you to enjoy the process. I hope that somewhere along the line, the hairs on the back of your neck go up a little bit. If they haven't yet, they will. The ceremony is unspeakably powerful. But between now and then, you have a job to do, as do I. So let's all get to it.
Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha unsurpassed.